And that's basically the logic developed by Bourdieu all through his career, which is the logic of the distinction. Right? You have to be born in culture in order to frequent culture, and the people are, from the start, prohibited from entering into culture. So there was nothing surprising about it. Bourdieu, a Marxist sociologist, had never stopped arguing that culture was predicated on class distinction. This cultural exclusion simply reproduced differences in upbringing and education. Popular taste had no chance to partake in the sublimated and strictly codified aesthetic experience. The sacred frontier, quote unquote, that existed between bourgeois culture and a world of ordinary consumption, lower, coarse, vulgar, servile, etc., as he defines it, the frontier had not been abolished. Bourdieu had made his career vindicated this obvious truth. In the process, he managed to turn sociology into a science. As you know, Bourdieu is a sociologist, an acknowledged sociologist. Baudrillard is nothing special. He was a sociologist when everyone was a sociologist. Barthes was no sociologist, was called a sociologist or called himself a sociologist. What Baudrillard said sometimes is that the best thing he did with sociology is make it impossible. Baudrillard couldn't care less about the sort of ontological promotion that supposedly came with cultural consumption. Like the situationist, he had no respect for bourgeois culture, let alone for those who were working hard to appropriate it. The idea that the masses secretly envied privileged culture was rather condescending in his eyes. He had even less respect for the alleged objectivity of sociology, actually never stopped debunking its main tenets. That he would find himself in agreement in any way with Bourdieu was even more galling. The two men, both sociologists, had a similar background. They came from humble rural families. This didn't prevent Bourdieu from successfully reap all the French honors and rewards, including the Collège de France and a quasi-national funeral in 2002. Baudrillard never managed to get very far in that direction, even feet first. He was turned down from the chair at the Sorbonne, a mere stepping stone to higher French intellectual recognition, after he presented his Ecstasy of Communication, which is the book we're reading for this session, as a doctoral habilitation. It isn't surprising that there would be an element of rivalry between the two men. It never went. It escalated into a symbolic exchange, but very well could have. Baudrillard's Beaubourg effect was also a challenge to his nemesis and to the distinction that he kept magnifying all the more vigorously that they were in the process of disappearing. It was no wonder that, given the intense public debate surrounding Beaubourg at the time, Baudrillard would have caught the ball on the rebound and ran away with it, challenging along the way the assumption his arch rival had arrived at through testing, polling, and direct interrogation, which is a tool of sociology. Had Bourdieu been his direct inspiration, let alone his master, Baudrillard would certainly have no qualm about forgetting Bourdieu. But Bourdieu was no Foucault, and Baudrillard found his claim to fame all the more irritating. This didn't prevent him from giving the famous sociologist the same treatment that he was furbishing about at the same time at Foucault's intention. Baudrillard didn't argue with Bourdieu, he did much worse. He approved his argument about the coarse enjoyment of the masses to such an extreme that it didn't leave anything behind, let alone Beaubourg. The World Trade Center, it was discovered, had a glaring structural flaw. The towers had no central pillar. That's Virilio pointed that out among many. Beaubourg himself had an Achilles heel of its own. Beyond 30,000 visitors, the structure risked bending and collapsing. Baudrillard was quick to notice that it gave the masses, quote, the chance of putting an end with one blow to both architecture and culture, end quote. Wittily replying to their own, the crowd could wittily reply with their own physical weight. And this is how they would do it. They would rush to Beaubourg en masse, and crush everything under their weight, disregarding all the distinction handed down by, for them, a cultural edification. They would turn Beaubourg into a freak show, a Sedgwick Price fan palace. In other words, what he was saying is that Beaubourg is made of Beaubourg was not exactly what the architect wanted it to be, because it would have been too unsafe, so they had to make compromises. But the glass part of Beaubourg gives a spectacular view on Paris. And basically what happened is that Beaubourg's museum were relatively neglected, but people came en masse to have a view of what was left of Les Halles and of Paris. It became a fun palace, and not at all the palace for the population. In a striking reversal of Bourdieu's dialectical claims, this would make legitimate culture illegitimate and dispel at once and for all the idea that it could be liberating. Turning the masses against culture, Beaubourg, and reversing their relation to the social, Baudrillard for the first time recognized their potential power. With In the Shadow of Silent Majority, he used the theorism instead as a springboard to project his new thesis on the masses and on the media. You will marvel that a completely ignorant mass, with all the sociological prejudice we may have, is capable of subverting such a powerful institution to engage in a practice he would call original, positive, to thwart the trap that was set for it. Needless to say, there was a lot of Baudrillard himself in these newfound masses. Do I still have a little time or not? Okay. Beaubourg wasn't about class distinction and reproduction, Baudrillard maintained. To the contrary, it was, quote, a machine for making emptiness, end quote. It was hollow, polyvalent, an interior space betrayed, the interior space betrayed its cool architectural envelope whose fragility, like the Twin Towers' insolence, called for its destruction. No need for theorists to do the job. The mass themselves would take care of that, with all due respect to a culture in which they didn't want to have any part. Conceived to be a prestigious expenditure, an altar, a sacrifice on the altar of May 68, it was simply poetic justice that the masses would perform on it, that kind of distraction and potlatch, returning President Pompidou his doubly unwanted gift. The masses' inherent inertia was in fact capable of triggering a completely new, inexplicable violence, different from explosive violence, end quote. As information pushed to the saturation point creates a sort of absolute void, an intense neutralization whose effect is akin to fascination, the masses flocking to Beaubourg would immediately fall into some sort of cultural catalepsy. Reaching critical mass in this huge space, the masses would implode in slow motion with, quote, a violence that would follow an inordinate densification of the social, end quote. Like the Paris Commune drained by Henri Lefebvre and Guy Debord, it happened exactly 1 century later, the masses now would seize the building just in order to be there. They would use it not culturally, but kinetically. They would walk on it, returning its clean, open structure to the messy carnival of Les Halles that had been ruthlessly taken away from them and disinfected. It would be the belated triumph of the populace Hobbes had feared. May 68 wasn't a revolutionary explosion, but the first intimation of this violent involution of the social. The transparent structure of Beaubourg was like an emergency room in which the social was rushed and administrated animation and reanimation, information, self-management, media networking, all testifying to the terminal coma of the patient. The first Iraq war never happened because it was just a simulated sacrifice made out of son et lumière, sound and light, but the Beaubourg battle actually took place, leveling the building to the ground. Didn't Baudrillard say that one should only build what deserves to be destroyed?